Welcome to the CEC Report. It's June 17th. I'm Robert Barwick. Welcome, Craig Isherwood.
Thanks, Robbie.
All right, this week's report. Carbon tax update. Melbourne Uni heavies shield Ross Garnaut from CEC questioning. Volcanoes are another good reason for Maglev trains. And finally, the great Australian housing market tsunami has started. So first, to a carbon tax update. Melbourne University heavies shield Ross Garnaut from CEC questioning. Last night at a Ross Garnaut event at Melbourne University, the moderator pulled away the microphone from the CEC's Doug Mitchell when he was asking Garnaut a question.
Hi, I'm Doug Mitchell. I'm from the Citizens Electoral Council. Ross, I want to know why do you hide your real agenda, which is to smash what's left of Australia's national industries, just as you've done your whole career, which is directing the deregulation and free trade reforms of Hawke and Keating, which have annihilated...
Thank you. Well, moving on to the next question. Grace is what we're after. Yes.
For the record, Doug's whole question to Ross Garnaut was this: why do you hide your real agenda, which is to smash what's left of Australia's national industries, just as you have done your whole career, directing the deregulation and free trade reforms of Hawke and Keating, which have annihilated Australia's value-adding industries and reduced us to one huge quarry for companies you are part of, such as Rio Tinto? That was the question. Now, the CEC is attending as many of these Ross Garnaut events as we can to distribute our press release, which you can get on our website on the media release section, Ross Garnaut Economic Hitman. And what that press release does is expose that Ross Garnaut, his whole career, has been a leading henchman for the Crown's agenda to de-industrialise Australia. For what purpose? To reduce our, destroy our capacity to function as a nation state. Because if we can't be an independent sovereign nation state in economic terms, then we have no choice but to be a globalised quarry in a free trade world, where Australia's contribution to the world economy is just raw materials that get shipped to other places, etc., and we go into debt to buy goods back. That is the British agenda. No nation states, just a free trade world that reduces nations to being colonial assets like that. However, obviously our presence is getting up their noses. So Craig, when you look at this footage, why do you think they're so sensitive?
It's called the CEC reflex, Robbie.
Oh, okay, yep.
Yeah, this is a natural reflex whenever the CEC's at these sorts of events, because look what we represent. 20 years of fighting against everything that Garnaut represents. We represent the idea of national sovereignty, that Australia should be a sovereign nation state that develops itself, that we should have a sovereign credit system, not this monetarist system that's destroying our country. And what is Ross Garnaut represents? The economic hitman. The persons, there's a number of them that are deployed by the Crown specifically to go in and do what you say, smash economic sovereignty. And this is happening in a context. I mean, people, when they go to these meetings, sometimes aren't completely aware of the context. Well, we're in a process of the global disintegration of the world's monetary and financial system as we speak. And the idea of the likes of Ross Garnaut is we've got to get as much money out of the economy as possible, money, not wealth, money, in order to prop up this monetarist system. If you have a look, for example, where the epicentre of this breakdown is taking place right now, it's in Europe. And if you take Greece as the country that's being smashed, you see there's a mass strike taking place in Greece. I mean, there's a population of mere 11.3 million people there, and 500,000 people every Sunday are coming out and protesting the policies of austerity and everything that Ross Garnaut stands for. So, you know, what you see in the world today is this policy of literally smashing country sovereignty, smashing their governments, forcing their governments to cut the budgets necessary to support the people. In the case of Greece, they have a huge sovereign debt problem, right? And the only way to solve this, in fact, is for the likes of the Inter-Alpha Banking Group, which is basically the financial arm of the British Empire, to take a hit on the sovereign debt of Greece, which should be 30, 40, 50%, because, look, there's no way that Greece can possibly pay this debt by demanding more taxes of them, getting rid of social infrastructure like paying pensions and so forth. This can't do it, right? And the people are protesting. But if they take a sovereign hit, like the Inter-Alpha Group, take a sovereign hit of even 10%, this will implode immediately the financial and monetary system run by the British. The other interesting thing is that you can't look to the United States either, because just in the last couple of days, the former Inspector General of the TARP program, that's the Trouble Asset Relief Program that's put into place by Bush as part of the bailout in 2008, his name was Neil Barofsky. He's since left that post. He came out publicly and said that today it would require a bailout of $5 trillion to do what was done similar to what was done in 2008. And back in 2008, the bailout was a massive $700 billion. So look, the US economy is a basket case, and this points even more for more necessity towards the global Glass-Steagall. So when the CEC goes along to these meetings, and we're very vociferous when it comes to the solutions, global Glass-Steagall, go back to policies that protect the national interest in the sense of the general welfare of our country. We've been doing it for 20 years. So when Garnaut's being protected, he's being protected from ideas, and that's
But in this particular case, they're protecting him, and they want people to realise the context that you've just laid out, which is that what he's doing is an economic attack on Australia, not an environmental policy.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because look, what happened in the last New South Wales election? The government was smashed. One of the principal reasons was the deregulation of the electricity industry, privatisation, sell off government assets. See, what's happened is that these sorts of policies, economic policies, are on the nose. So what do we see is the flip side of the same policy, the green policy come up, the carbon tax, right? And guess who's pushing the same agenda? Ross Garnaut, economic hitman. So the economic policy issue discussion, privatisation, deregulation, the selling off of public assets has become so on the nose for people. Now they're flip-siding it over to the lies that go with the environmental fraud of having to have a carbon tax because of carbon pollution, all that sort of stuff.
It's austerity to bail out the banks by another name.
Yes. Prop up this monetary system at all costs. Won't work. The only solution is a global Glass-Steagall, and we've got plenty of material on our website that goes through this, and people really should have to understand what's at stake here by reading that material on our website.
Let's talk about that more in a minute when we talk about the property crisis in Australia. Just before we go to a break though, breaking news, which is fascinating, today, the 17th of June, this morning in Canberra, Prince Charles himself, obviously on behalf of Mumsy, delivered a video address to a meeting of business leaders called the National Business Leaders Forum on Sustainable Development. And Charles's message from Mumsy was, ignore the climate deniers in Australia, which is, probably royal speak for off with their heads, and act on climate change at all costs. That's Prince Charles' message today in Canberra.
So if there's any evidence, if anyone wants any more proof this is being run, the entire economic debate and the climate debate is being run by the Crown, just look at that evidence.
There you go. There are marching orders from our future king. Let's hope pretty soon he's no longer our future king.
I hope not.
All right, so
we don't need a king at all.
I agree. On that note, when we come back, volcanoes are another good reason for maglev trains. Welcome back. So now let's talk about why volcanoes are another good reason for maglev trains. So this week's CEC report has a dramatic exclusive. CEC leader stranded in Perth by a Chilean volcano. Now obviously, Craig, you were showing you're a man of the people, feeling everyone's pain, being in the same boat as the rest of them.
The other 100,000, Robert.
The other 100,000?
Yes.
Okay. But I understand you had an epiphany while you were trying to figure out how you'd get yourself back to Melbourne.
Well, when you're stuck in the world's remotest capital city, Perth, and you have to be back in Melbourne for, say, coming to this show, you
Very
figure out, well,
important.
how do I get there? So you start working through the options. Car. Let's go by car. Hire a car. 37 hours non-stop driving. I've done that 4 times. No thanks. Then you think about, well, bus. Yes, you could do bus if you could get on, because you've got 20,000 people stranded, 10,000 people in Perth or something like that. Huge number of people. I don't exactly know the numbers, but then bus is not that comfortable either. It's necessary. I've done it too. Then you look at train. Well, you look up the train. Well, if you've got $2,000, you'll be fine.
2,000.
Yes, and if you're happy to leave,
And how long's that trip?
That's about 30 hours too. And then you're looking at three train trips, three train schedules per week: Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's all there is, right? And think, what a complete joke Australian infrastructure is. And then you look towards China. Why can't we have a Maglev train system, right? Here we have some of the straightest railway line already in the world. 458 kilometres of straight railway line. These trains, the magnetic levitation trains that hover on magnetic magnets above a steel guideway, monorail, travel at an average in China right now of 251 kilometres per hour. Right now. They peak at 451 kilometres per hour. Now, if we were an inventive nation, which we are, if we had the policies that supported this, we could be building trains right now that I could foresee getting to 700-800 kilometres per hour, which would mean you could have a fleet of these trains running backwards and forwards across the Nullarbor, just to that part, so that within 3-4 hours, equivalent of plane travel, you could be in Melbourne in a great degree of comfort, right? But when you look at it even further, the problem with it being in Perth, it's so far away, it's sort of paradigmatic of the tyranny of distance we have in our entire country. And that's why I've promoted and proposed many times that we need to build the Australian ring rail of Professor Lance Endersby, where we have a series of these high-speed rail corridors developing like a transport artery within our country, from Melbourne up the inside of the eastern states, up through then to Darwin, then down again to Perth, and across, of course, from Perth through Adelaide into Melbourne. So that means you break the tyranny of distance.
When you talk about a vision like that, the question comes up: where's the money going to come from? In the past, certainly when we've been promoting these projects, that would be the biggest sticking point. Of course, in more recent times, we've become used to concepts such as the National Broadband Network of $45 billion and bank bailouts of hundreds of billions of dollars, and that does put infrastructure in perspective. But even a project across the Nullarbor, which would be a very big project, certainly today would not be as big as when the first transcontinental railway line was built. So how would we fund it, and how did they fund it then?
We'll go back to what actually King O'Malley did back in the 1910, 1911, 1912 period, when he developed or proposed the building of the transcontinental railroad system for Australia back then. It was funded by the Commonwealth Bank, a bank modelled on the first national bank of the United States, which created or provided the credit necessary to build that railway line. See, what people look at these days is that they're brainwashed by private enterprise to say that we have to have a return within 5 years. Infrastructure is not like that. You have to take periods of 25, 50, 100 years. And you don't look at the net return in dollar figures, you look at the expansion in the physical economy. Now, just take a railroad system between Melbourne and the eastern states, say Melbourne and Perth and Melbourne, right? If you had a Maglev train system, right, you could be running trains, Maglev trains, every 3 hours. Freight trains, passenger trains, right? You couldn't, in some cases, you wouldn't even have to refrigerate material in order to get it from Melbourne to Perth. Think about who would utilise that facility other than, right now they have to use air transport. So we have to go back to use the model King O'Malley did. Use the most modern technologies. He brought rail track layers out from the United States to build this railway line. We use the most modern technology. We do it in partnership with China, and we build the most modern system possible for our country. And at the moment, for us, that would be almost off-the-shelf technologies like Maglev. There are other proposals out there which we might discuss on the show at another time. But when I envisage hopping on a Maglev in Perth when you're stranded there because the air's clogged with ash, it sort of brings the point home of just how backward we are in terms of our infrastructure in this country.
And needless to say, there'd be few things that could actually stop a Maglev train functioning as opposed to the fragile nature of air travel.
No, you build it off the ground, I'd say off 6-foot platforms, which you can do, so you preserve the land underneath. You don't have to worry about hitting kangaroos or the wildlife, right? In some sections of it, you double track it so that you could have trains passing. There's all these solutions that have already been invented in order to build Maglev trains. All we have to do is just drop our 19th and 27th British monetarist attitude and get into nation building.
All right, so let's take a break, but Craig mentioned Professor Lance Endersby. I highly recommend, if you haven't bought and read his book, A Voyage of Discovery, do so. You can order it from the CEC on our online store, or just call us 1-800 636 432. It's an excellent read to give an insight into the mind of someone who personally made it his mission to design development concepts for Australia to advance us as a nation state. So when we return, let's talk about how the Great Australian Housing Market Tsunami has started. And welcome back again. So finally, the Great Australian Housing Market Tsunami has started. Now, we've all learned in recent years from our experience with these dramatic tsunamis that have happened that when the tide suddenly goes out, it's a warning sign there's a tsunami coming. Well, when it comes to the Australian housing market, the tide has gone out. So there's a lot of panic setting in the last couple of months now, because every week that goes by, the housing clearance rates from the weekend auctions are in a slump at around, not much more than 50%, when ordinarily they're around 80%. And this has been week after week for a couple of months. You've got close to double the ordinary number of houses on the market, which just aren't selling. So the people that, bought these things as investment properties or whatever, the panic could be setting in there. That's one aspect of the tide going out. The other one is mortgage stress, like in 2007, is once again on the rise. So this week, the Fitch Ratings Agency produced a report of a survey they've done, which shows that mortgage delinquencies are going up all over the place. As of now, nationwide in Australia, of all mortgages, 1 in 80 are in arrears, but that's all mortgages. There are some pockets of Australia where that figure is as high as 1 in 18. One of those named was the town of Nelson's Bay in New South Wales, for example. 1 in 18 mortgages are in arrears. Now, what's interesting about this Fitch survey is it focused on mortgage arrears. The mortgage stress levels are higher than those figures because, of course, there's a lot of Australians who will do anything to not fall behind their mortgage payments. And they go without food often to not fall behind their mortgage payments. So there are people really doing it tough out there. The other thing is the Fitch survey only surveyed mortgages that have been securitised. These are the ones that have been sold on to investors. So that Fitch went and asked the investors in these mortgages what the status is on payments. These do not include the mortgages held by the banks, which of course is the great majority of them. The banks didn't participate in this survey. They do not want people to understand just how much turmoil there is in the property market in Australia, because if they did know that, it's the banks whose hides are at stake here, as the CEC has often said. We'll put out a release on this soon. So this is brewing like a tsunami. When a bubble bursts, there's no stopping it. And sort of like the final straw is this week, Reserve Bank Governor Glenn Stevens announced that interest rates are going to go up as early as August possibly. So, Craig, given this situation, isn't Glenn Stevens' announcement like a death sentence to thousands of families?
The death sentence, Robbie, is the global financial system. That's what's coming down, which I mentioned before. with all this debt that's in the system, I mean, you got what you have is Australia trying to compete to pay its debt. Yep. Australia has something like $1 trillion of debt in the system, of which something like 800 billion, some huge amount is owned by the banks, and they have to turn this debt over in a very, very short period, a large proportion of it about every 90 days. So the only way you can do that is keep attracting the capital, turn it over, otherwise the entire thing sinks. So what you have is a bubble, in the housing bubble, right? You have, that's because of the way that's been constructed deliberately by the first homeowners scheme for things like, that sort of thing, which has artificially inflated the prices. And the interest rates there are not to do with the housing prices per se, but to prop up the international financial bubble by attracting this capital.
That's it. They have to keep bringing the funds in that allow the banks to pay roll over their foreign loans. They've got to raise interest rates.
Right, and they've got to flog houses in order to be able to try and get that income stream to keep the whole bubble turning over. The problem is that Australian housing is some of the most unaffordable in the world, and if you have a look at the 7th annual Demographica International Housing Survey, which has just come out this year in 2011, you find that places like Sydney have the average cost of housing is 9 times the median income, right, of people in Sydney. And this graph shows it, that I'll put up on the screen now, shows that Melbourne is 9 times. What housing should be, it should be 3 times, right? 3 times, but we're paying, 9 times, 9.5 times. That shows you that we're in big trouble. The solution to this is what we put out before. It's on our website. It's called the Homeowners and Bank Protection Bill. And this means that the federal government would step in and put a moratorium, slap a freeze on all home mortgages and on all mortgages for family farms, freeze the debt, right? Because this bubble is going to burst at some point. And it's bursting now. We can see it coming down. And therefore you have to have an orderly transition to take people from what has been a speculative economy into a protected economy so that people can actually survive. And what we do in that DVD is we go through precisely the steps of what has to be done. And it's ironic because we put that out 2 years ago, or nearly 3 years ago now, but it's becoming more and more relevant as we go along because nothing has been solved when it comes to the global financial disintegration.
Well, they attempted to put this off in 2008 with the first homeowners grant, which they told the public was to make housing more affordable, but in their cabinet meetings they did it to do the opposite, to make housing more unaffordable because they wanted to push the house prices up. So at all costs the government has pulled out all the stops to keep the property bubble going, but when the population reaches a breaking point, which is what we're seeing with the cost of living, there's nothing they can do to stop it at a certain point, and that's what we're seeing now. So when you get to this position, the government's only responsibility is the welfare of the people, right?
And this is what was done in the 1930s by Franklin Roosevelt. He moved against the commercial banks at that point. I think it's actually the investment banks. And he said, no, I'm not going to have this speculation in the housing sector. And he brought in rules and regulations that kept people in their homes. So we have a precedent for this. It's what was done at that point. It's what's even done in Australia. So we have to go back to that. So that's why I say have a look on the website and look at the Homeowners and Bank Protection Bill.
All right, thanks a lot, Craig. Okay, so that's it for this week's weekly report. These are dramatic developments which are going to intensify over the coming couple of weeks, undoubtedly. They also intersect the very disturbing news coming out of Europe with the Greece bailout, etc. So we'll report on that on our website as well. So thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for more updates and we'll see you next week.